Well, can I say a formal good morning to everybody? It's morning where I am. I know that many of you are joining us from Scotland, but I know not everybody is. So wherever you are in the world, we are absolutely delighted that you've come along to this session. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what our three participants have to share with us. All three of them have studied or are still studying with us at the University of Glasgow. Our first two speakers, Rihanna Shanks and Paul Campbell, are currently studying on our EdD, our Educational Doctoral Programme, and we're delighted that they are joining us today from Hong Kong, from a school, and they're going to tell you more about that. And Athol is joining us from Beijing, and they are Athol, sorry, I'm now just some messages coming in. I'm doing that, trying to do that multitasking thing, but I think Carolina, my colleague from...
Don't worry about the messages, yeah.
Oh, okay. Carolina will have her eye on those and see what she can do to help people. So Athol is in Beijing and is one of our alumni here at Glasgow, and I'll say more about each of them as they come to speak to you. This morning's session, obviously all over the world we are thinking about returning to school. I think at one point the World Health Organization and UNESCO put out the number of children who were out of school at any one time, and that was in March, and many more countries went into lockdown after that, and it was many, many millions of children. And of course all of these countries who have been in that position are now also in the position of returning to school, and in fact society of course returning as well to opening up businesses. And here in Scotland we're waiting to see what our First Minister says about that this morning. And so although we are all in different countries and in different contexts, different education systems, different legislation, where school just in February in each of these countries may well have looked very different from each other, we are now all in a similar position in that we're having to think, what does that mean for us as children and young people return to school? And so in hearing what people are doing in countries who in relation to Scotland certainly are maybe a little further down the road than we are, we thought it would be a good idea to bring together our colleagues, Rihanna, Paul and Athol, and ask them if they would share their experiences. They're not here to tell you what to do. They're not here to make comment on education systems, either their own or ours in Scotland or anyone else's, but they're here as three people who have had to think really hard and to put in place procedures to help children return to their place of learning. And so we're looking forward to hearing from them, and I'm going to ask and hand over just in a minute or two to Rihanna Shanks. Rihanna Shanks is originally from Scotland. She may say more about that, and is currently studying for her EdD, her doctorate, here with us in Glasgow. And she is the head teacher of Sha Tin Junior School in Hong Kong. And so, Rihanna, it is with great delight and pleasure that I'd like to hand over to you now for you to share your experiences. Thank you.
I've just realised that my slides are in the wrong order, so I apologise profusely because we did a trial and I never put it back to the beginning. So off to a normal school day start, I think. I just want to say thank you to everybody for allowing me to come on today to talk about my experience. It's a bit of a privilege to do so because it's given me the opportunity to reflect and take on board just the enormity of everything that's happened in the last few months, and to acknowledge that the context that I'm working in is indeed very different, and to have the opportunity to talk about what I did do and what I have learned is as I said, a privilege. And it's given me the opportunity to consider myself as the other and consider my practice from the other side of the mirror in this presentation I'm going to share with you today. So moving on, one of the first things that happened for me was connected. I was a new school leader in Hong Kong in August last year, coming over from Edinburgh, where I was a head teacher before that. And I arrived in Hong Kong during social unrest before COVID-19. And one of the biggest things I wanted to do was connect with my school community and, you know, build a circle of collaboration and identity around about that, and understand, you know, my staff's autobiographies as teachers and learners, and understand where we were going with our journey together, and what assumptions were being made in context, and how do these connect with the personal, the social and occupational identities of my staff, and how I was going to frame these and come together. Now, what you can see in this picture in front of you is an actual physical activity we did on an in-service day, where we were owning our own teacher identity, and we wrote a word about ourselves, one of our values that we hold dear to us as a teacher. We made a promise to ourselves that we would carry on in this journey this year, and really own, you know, our practice and have it as intentional. And it was a really powerful thing to do, because it refocused ourselves as individuals, as teachers, but also us within a circle as in the school teaching team. And obviously the reason for this is we're working with students. This is my school here in Hong Kong. There's 900 students in that picture. And it's really important that actually I'm connected to what my students are experiencing. And it's important for me to understand what they're seeing, and what they're seeing through our actions, and what they're talking about from our current, what they're taking from our current practice, and the meaning, whether we intended it or not, and what we're actually delivering to them. So I think quite often about what is our offer for our students, my students in my school, and how are they perceiving that now that we've gone from being in school to being out of school and now back in school. How do the children perceive all of what's happened to them, and how do I make sure that the actions that I have as a school leader are meaningful for the reason that I'm in my job in the first place, which is to give really good service to these students, but to look after them and to look after the staff around about them. So that led me to think about, you know, the capabilities that we have as educators, and not just the student experience, but my staff experience as well, you know, my colleagues' experiences. And early on into the process, we had really critical conversations around about practice, health and well-being, aspects of our practice which is normally hidden within our classrooms to a degree, or private to us and our students, becoming very, very public, overnight public, and how we responded to the situations we faced as educators and as part of the team, and how we responded professionally to the challenges that we were faced with, you know, and how do we see our practice now that we're back in school in a new light, and what have we learned in that. And obviously a huge part of that process is me as a school leader, as a leading practitioner in the school, engaging in critical reflection and challenging my own public, practice in public during critical incidents that were happening. I remember being on quite an early Zoom call with my staff after we closed, and I was being quite directive in some of the things that we were talking about, and I realised that in the conversation about, oh, I really want you to do this, I had to step out of that and really look in the mirror and think, I'm being too directive here. I'm not actually allowing the autonomy for my staff to do what they do best, which is teach. And I had to really ground myself back to what was important. And some of you will have noticed who've done into headship and, you know, or an ED programme, I've used Brookfield's lenses already to shape the conversation in the slides that I've had there. And I needed to ground myself into my own knowledge of theory and practice as a Scottish educator, because I've had the luxury to come through the system and have some lenses placed for me to scaffold my own learning, but also my opportunity as a doctorate student to be in the online learning platforms as well, such as Moodle, and being used to, you know, that kind of approach to learning, which I guess has really helped me and allowed me to interpret the significance of the situations I was dealing with and been able to name it in different ways. The first quote on there is a Brookfield quote, not a Brookfield quote, a Dewey quote, which many of you will recognise. As a school leader, I'm not a private soldier in my own army. You know, as a school leader, I had to really think about my own actions and the intended and unintended consequences of those and own them. And there's many times during this process I've had to say I've got that wrong, or actually I'm really pleased with how we've done that. I did use Brookfield's 4 critical lenses, as I've just said, to reflect on this, to allow me to name my practice, and now to you to name that practice as well, so that many of you can resonate with the story that I'm telling or about to tell. I also found that I focused on the theory of human capabilities and what we're able to do and be, which allowed us as a staff to create conditions where we were able to make choices around our practice. This also allowed me to think about my practice from a lens of health and well-being of others, and in a dignified way, giving meaning to what they're undertaking and celebrating our successes. Nussbaum's theory really helped me to focus on my leadership of enabling others, and Brookfield's theory really allowed me to put myself in the role of the other and look in the mirror at my own actions and own them. So there was two kind of main influences on my own knowledge generation from the processes that I've been through. And that leads into the next slide that I'm going to share with you, which is capacity. I'm going to indulge myself with a quote here slightly. Human beings need to see themselves as bound to other human beings by ties of recognition and concern. They need the ability to think about what it might be like to be in the shoes of a person different to oneself, to be an intelligent reader of that person's story, and to understand the wishes and desires that someone so might have. That's a Nussbaum quote. Now, if I share with you the screen here, this here is my staff collaboratively putting the pieces together in the whole crisis that we've been through, a critical incident. The first one is a narrative which was 4 weeks into our school closure, and what they did and what they then went on to do to enable them to teach. And then they felt they put all this information together, that they wanted to tell the story so that other people could perhaps help other people put the pieces together so that people could reflect on that process. It focused on student experience. And we got to the point of being on our platforms, doing what we do best, teaching and enabling ourselves as a group of educators. Because we closed overnight. It wasn't like we knew we were closing. It was literally overnight. The second one is actually, how are we making sure our students are progressing during this extended school closure? And we asked ourselves as a group a number of questions that we felt we needed to answer. And we had some help with this with one of our strategic directors, Alan Milliken, who's also a Scot, by the way. Many of you might know Alan too, who helped us focus on what it was and how we evidenced what we were doing to ensure the continuity and progress in our student learning, and also how we were reporting on that and sharing that process with our parents and of course, and indeed the most important people, the students, focusing on those basic bits of our job, really. And then the next one here is actually the resumption plan. This is the one which our regulators, this was the absolute, you must do this. And then the last one here that you can see is our narrative, now we're back in school, what we did to get back into school in our context, and how we're teaching now as well is all in this. Now the reason why I'm sharing these with you is because these are the bits of the puzzle that the staff put together. These are not my narrative, this is the collaborative work of the staff and our enablement of coming together to build what this needed to look like, what we're doing now, our reflections on the journey, absolutely the regulatory stuff that we absolutely had to do, and now what does this look like? Again, because one of the bits of the process that these documents have allowed us to do is look in the mirror at our own practice, but equally it's an outward sort of process and ability to make us feel grounded in the fact that we can tell our story now because we've been through the process. And that's been really helpful because it's allowed us to create capabilities in ourselves and consider how our experiences may or may not enable others and allow them to consider it from their own point of view and their own starting point. And equally, it's allowed us to reflect on ourselves and what we need to do next to enable us to move forward as a school. But what was interesting was we really had to go through these processes to get back to school in the first place. And these are all the absolutes. Staff had to come in and identify, what layouts they were comfortable with teaching with the children. We had to consider all the hygiene arrangements, we had to consider the entrances and the exits to school, the transitions within the buildings, the lunchtime canteens, the temperature check-ins, the leaving school procedures, all the things that you're all doing as well. But this bit here was the one we did before term 3 started. We got together, looked at our narratives we had, and we said, right, okay, we think there's a possibility based on the cases going down that we could be back to school at some point in the near future. Where we had operated before, we had a planned day, but what we hadn't regulated was a timetable within that day. So there was a number of different activities for students to undertake. There was a number of different sessions where they were engaging with EAs and teachers online, and they were doing collaborative group work and various different things. But they were the only points of the day that were actually, this is when this happens. The rest of it was like, do it as and when during today, and then we'll move it on, we'll feed back on that, use your Padlets, use your Google Classrooms, whatever it is that you were actually using to record the data that you were sharing with your children. you know, they were our must-haves. And what it allowed us to do was, when we were coming back into school, we rebuilt a timetable with a starting activity that everyone was doing, and there was timetabled slots during the day, which gave us a full school day, which was then, you know, we're starting at this time, we're finishing at this time. But we also gave back a great deal of our teachers' lives to them at this point as well, because we had started to normalise the process. And when we came into school, we kept those fixed blocks that we had kept, because my school is currently operating on a 50% model and 100% learning. And this allows us to build in the slots that we're working in our home learning environments on a full-time sort of basis at this point. And it's still, and it's what we ended up with. I'm about to show you in the next slide. From this point of view, for me, is by planning it out and having the structure, it gave everybody the spaces not only to think about what it looked like in the classrooms, but what it physically could look like in the online and potentially offline environments as well, and the ways that we did this. Now, within my local authority, well, I'm saying local authority, but for the English Schools Foundation where I work, schools are all doing different things, but we're all doing 50% and 100% learning. So it's 50% in school and 100% learning based on whatever model people have worked in within their school communities, the one that would work best for them. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide and share with you one of all those plans coming together. This was our first day coming back to school. Now, I have to tell you, I was incredibly nervous. It was like a probationer in my first day going into school for the first time to see if all my plans were going to work and all the team plans were going to work. And it was a process in itself, just, is this going to work? And here it is. I'm going to show you this particular effort that we made. Oh, I've managed to move through without actually being able to show you the process. Don't know what's going on there. Try it now. I actually quite emotional watching this. So I have to say, none of that was actually easy, just in case I gave the impression it was. It took a lot of effort from everyone to get to that point of being able to bring students in to be with us. But it has been incredible for us to go through that process. The outcome was not necessarily by design, and some of the things that then happened. We had our plans in place. This is what we wanted it to look like. This is what we hoped it would look like based on those plans. And then other things have happened which have been phenomenal and groundbreaking for us within how we work now and will work in the future. The first conversation here at the top line of pictures here shows my boss, Belinda, who is also a Scot. I don't know, many of you may know her, Belinda Greer. She's the CEO of the English Schools Foundation. But Belinda had come into school to see the students, because she'd visited all the schools, but she went to see how they were, just to welcome them back. And we went into a year 3 classroom, which is a primary 3 classroom, and the children were doing a handwriting lesson. We're like, good morning, boys and girls, it's lovely to see you, so happy to have you back. Why don't you share your learning with Mrs. Greer and tell her what you're doing? So we're standing there, and then behind us this wee voice pops up and goes, we're doing our handwriting. And I turned around and realised that actually at that point we had all 30 children in the classroom. It was one of the planned lessons that was there for the day. But what was amazing for me, and I hadn't even contemplated, was the fact that all 30 children were engaged in the same activity. The EAs were at the different computers around the classrooms, scaffolding the learning of the children in the online environment, and the children in the classroom were there already. There was buddy activity going on as well because of the resource that we had enabled that to happen. But it was a phenomenal thing to see happen in context, and it evolved a lot of what we did next because we had children who were working together in differentiation and various different things. So it was really powerful for us, really powerful. But again, I guess it's not a comparable context to elsewhere, but it's what happened in our school. And in the bottom ones here, you can see there's a number of things that have happened that are just normal, but it's just examples of what it looks like for us and how it feels, and it feels good. And I'm moving into another slide. This is our youngest children. We weren't allowed to bring all the children back at the same time, so we had 25% in the first day of our oldest children, which was years 4 to 5. The college were the same. They had some of their older children in. The next day we had the other half, 25%. On the Wednesday we went to 50%, but 25% of our youngest children. So we're up at 75% by that point. And I mean 75% of the 50% we're allowed to bring back. And then it was the alternate cycle the next day, and by Friday everyone had been in. This is our youngest children coming in. This is a year 2 class, primary 2 class. So that leads me on to what I actually learned. It starts being phenomenal. What I learned is I love my job. I've always loved being a teacher, and I still love being a teacher. I learned that teachers are extremely professional and able, and if you give them a problem, they solve it because they care about the kids, and it's about the kids being at the heart of everything we do. You know, they care about the children's health and well-being. They care about the learning. We just care, and I can't even express how grateful I am to my staff. I'm going to get emotional about that, but I can't even tell you. I think you probably know because you're in the same circumstances. But but also it led us to a new level of sharing and owning our stories, because actually our stories might actually help others do the same thing that we're facing, and we know how we felt going into those situations like everybody else does. It's a challenging moment, it's a defining moment for what we do in schools and how we affect the children that we teach, and there's nothing more important than keeping the students at the heart of what we do. You know, who needs to be included? I mean, we've all got those questions going on, and which lanes need to be focused. What do we actually need to be doing right here? What's actually important, you know, and what do we need to get rid of because it's no longer relevant? And I think I've kept that in my mind coming back to school as well. And do you see what I see in the sense of our young people see everything? They don't miss anything. They've heard the conversations in their households. They've heard the conversations here around the protests as well, you know. And what I want for them is to see more than what they see with their physical eyes and what that shows them. I want them to see that, like, my staff and I deeply care about them, and that they feel nurtured as humans, and that they're worthy of the dignity and respect that young people deserve, because they're the ones who will actually change everything that's going on for us just now. But also, it's so important that we give them the best educational offer that we can give them in our gift as educators. And I feel really proud of my staff for every effort they have made to do that. And I also feel quite proud that I'm able to reflect back on the process and look at it and see, okay, right, I should have done that better, but equally, this is the steps we have taken. And actually, some of those have been really strong and have enabled us to have really robust conversations moving forward, because there's nothing that you can't really see, because everything is so exposed within our practice range now. So I feel really good about that element of it. I also feel really good because the school feels normal and happy, even though we've only got physically 50% of the students actually in the building, but it's given us opportunities to differentiate to a greater depth with some of our students and include them and nurture them and bring them in so that they feel really secure within the environment. And our online platforms are buzzing, is probably the best way to put it, with students who are engaging with us during the school day, and the EAs are responding, the teachers are responding to this at great knots, but it feels like a school community, and that's very precious. And I want to leave you with one more thing that I have as precious for me. This is a moment of normality. Now, these bikes were bought for the students before the school closure by our PTA, but they never got to ride them. And I know it seems really small, but getting these out onto the playground and the kids being able to use them and during social distancing and school coming back from school closure has been phenomenal. So it's just been able to do the normal things for kids and celebrate the things that they were already working towards, and feel that actually, do you know, we're on track to be back to our new normal, so to speak. So I want to thank everybody for allowing me to share my story. And actually, you know, it's good to even just outwardly process that and ground myself back into the lenses that have been shared and remind myself what is actually the most important thing we face in crisis situations. And for me as a school leader, it's always the health and well-being of my
Graham and Pamela are really anxious about it. They're really anxious about her not going to anybody else because she is so kind of strange, and but she will be.
In fairness, there's going to be a whole generation.
I know.
It's the bunny hop that I particularly like. Just, you know, thank you for allowing me to share. I'll pass back to Margaret.
Thank you, Rihanna. Can you unshare your screen?
I'm trying to.
Thank you so much. I had the privilege of seeing that video, of course, before Rihanna spoke, so I knew what you were about to see, but it's been great to also hear that presentation narrated. There's some really interesting things, I think, that Rihanna said in there, not only interesting, but actually very important things as we are thinking about how we support young people as they come back to school. We are tweeting, so all this technology, we've got live streaming, we've got the presentation here, we've got Twitter, so do join us on Twitter if you have a Twitter account as well. And also Carolina has been encouraging you to place your questions in the chat, and Carolina is collating these for us, and they're coming through to my WhatsApp. We may not get a chance to answer them all, but some brilliant questions as well, and we will try and pick up on these too. And that's a lovely picture you have there, Rihanna, of yourself and the young people in your school. It gives me the great pleasure now to hand over to Paul Campbell. Paul, similar to Rihanna, is an Ed.D student with us here at the University of Glasgow. And Paul is a teacher in the same school as Rihanna. So I'm going to ask Paul now to share his experiences of working with his class. Paul, over to you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to actually, well, selfishly stop and reflect on what has been probably the most hectic 4 weeks of all the time that I've been in teaching. Thank you for the opportunity, obviously, everybody. Thank you for joining as well, and I'm looking forward to the conversation afterwards as well. But I wanted to start with just sharing a bit of reflection on where do we actually start. I mean, we're living through one of the most unique periods in human history, probably one of the most unique periods in our own histories as well. And with that comes a lot of conversation, a lot of perspectives, a lot of opinions on how to do different things. But ultimately what I hope this webinar offers the opportunity to do is actually just to be in a kind of state of openness and stop and reflect a little bit on the experiences that we share, the experiences that have been a bit different, and what these might actually mean for us in our respective contexts. At no point, obviously, am I going to be sharing anything today that I think should be done in every single school. I'm sharing what has been effective for the particular context that I'm in. Obviously, all our colleagues here on this webinar this afternoon or this morning, we've come from our own context, we have our own histories, we have our own factors influencing the work that we do, and this will influence how you interpret these experiences and how you might potentially take something away from this to support your thinking as you plan for your return to school as well. So ultimately what I think I will be demonstrating here is the complexity of this, but how we can start to pull out some common threads that should help with the return to school planning. So in terms of where we actually start when we're considering what does the experience look like when we finally return to school post-campus closure, is to actually return to, well, what our main focus is, what we value, what we think is important for the communities and our young people that we serve doesn't actually change. It's about trying to reorientate ourselves towards what is it that we've actually indicated and value as being important in the jobs that we do, in the context we find ourselves in, and how do we ensure that our practice actually reflects a continued commitment to that. So when we're serving our young people in our community, they're at the heart of all the decisions that we make, whether that's in relation to the form that learning and teaching takes, whether it's in relation to how we support the well-being of students, staff, and to families within our community, whether it's about how we engage with the community as well and how we enable the collaboration that needs to take place to enable the return to school to be as smooth and effective as possible. These things don't change. These characteristics that I've got up on the screen here, I'm certain would characterise a lot of the context, if not all the context that each of us are working in. So it's about trying to keep focused on these and ensuring that the practice that does emerge as we return to school remains reflective of what we think is important and what we value. And ultimately, it comes down to how are we going to ensure that we have the best experiences possible for the students as they come back in this particularly complex time, but also support them to make sense of it. And ultimately, to do that, we also have to consider how we support our teams to do that too. So in terms of the key lessons, here, my screen's covered up quite a lot, so hopefully I'll remember most of it off the top of my head. The key thing that you think about initially when we're planning for the journey back to school and the resumption of classes in school is, first of all, the spaces that we're going to be operating in. So we have to plan for physical distancing, but also what we're hoping for is some element of familiarity within that space as well. How do we ensure that this space remains a comfortable space for learning, but also something that students feel comfortable in moving around and accessing despite the physical restrictions that may be in place? And that includes, I guess, even just thinking about the accessibility and the flexibility of the furniture itself, but also the spaces themselves too, how we make sure they're safe and hygienic, but how we make sure they're flexible too. And part of that is considering, like, well, how do we make these spaces plural and connected? How do we make it plural or connected with our digital spaces as well as the physical spaces in class, which I'm sure will need to be a consideration in many places too. So this stimulated a lot of our decision making as a team. And I'm being very intentional here in the sense I'm not talking about what I did or what I did for my class and my students. It's very much, as Rohanna's indicated already, a collective endeavour, and it's remained that way throughout the process as we resume learning on campus. And then of course, as we're designing the spaces to resume classes in school, we have to be considerate of knowing what our learners' needs actually are in terms of their emotional and social well-being, but obviously academically as well. What are they hoping for the return to school as well? It's something we spent a lot of time exploring with our students. What are they hoping to come back to? What might they be worried about? And how can we actually cater for that? What support might need to be in place? But also, it's important to think about what experiences do we think they all should still be entitled to, irrespective of the physical restrictions that may be in place, and how do we actually make that happen? Now, central to all of this for the well-being of our students, for a sustained excellent experience at school as well, but also for the well-being of our staff, the key thing has been about collaboration. How do we collaborate in terms of how we plan for the use of spaces, but plan for learning and teaching too? How are we enabling the continued sharing of ideas, of expertise as well? It's actually been, in some ways, even easier when we've been operating in a virtual environment. But also, how are we going to collaborate and plan for the transitions that are coming up as well? And there's been some excellent examples shared internationally already, in Scotland too. Twitter's been great for that, and I'll share some examples from our context later too. And as we're thinking about that collaboration and the needs of our students and how we can use the spaces to support that, a key element to all of this has been about how we actually build a genuine feeling of togetherness in a physically distanced space, which might sound challenging. It is challenging, but it's absolutely possible too. And that's through a relentless focus on well-being, focusing on how we maintain social connections, even though we are physically distanced, and basically how we balance the priorities. We know what the purposes of schools and schooling are, but actually have those priorities changed even slightly. So that could be even rethinking the pace of what we do. And ultimately, to enable all of this and to sustain all of this, both now, but also after the holidays, depending on what this might look like after the summer break, is about the engagement with the whole community, but also the engagement of students within the spaces too. It's things that we've been doing regularly throughout this process in the lead up to the return to school, but after the return to school is continuing regular family check-ins, one-to-one with students, with staff and with parents too, but also just making sure that we're still enabling collaborative learning in the physical and the digital spaces, so that it still reflects the usual or the common student experience when they would be at school under normal circumstances. But ultimately, about how we can actually develop that feeling in the school community where people are engaged and they are connected. So I'm going to try and elaborate briefly and quickly on each of these key elements. So in terms of setting up the space, ultimately what dictates that initially is what the local guidelines are. So ensuring we're following those restrictions and those guidelines, but then actually trying to think a bit creatively about, with the furniture and the space we have access to, how can we make sure that, and what layouts have we tested to make sure that students are there learning and interacting safely, but we can still remain connected and visible, and making sure that the things we need to consider in terms of accessibility, in terms of hearing, in terms of accessing resources are considered too. This is something that's just going to take time. It's going to take multiple approaches and tests to eventually come up with something that's going to be suitable in your context. And ultimately, hygiene and safety is the key priority there. But the key thing that's been important for us is how we blend the physical and the digital environments too. We're in a fortunate context where technological infrastructure and access to internet is not something that we have to worry about, which I know is very different in other contexts. So because of that, we've been able to rely on access to technology and including our students who might still be at home in the learning experience in school as well. But it's also then trying to plan for, during the day, what are going to be the times where the students from home are going to be joining. Do the students in school still utilise that technology simultaneously or at different times? But how do we ensure that there's not too much screen time when they return to school as well, but also at home too? That's been an active part of the planning process throughout this time. And then ultimately, when we're thinking about our focus on learners, as I mentioned before, the familiarity, emphasis on social connection, we need engaging and flexible task design to cater for those that are both in school and at home. The key thing for all of this has been wanting to look for opportunities for authentic application as well, which is going to help maintain their engagement throughout the learning process. But also, how can we connect this with the broader community? So we utilise this opportunity to share what learning looks like, but also share and the learning together too. So the way we were able to do that was trying to stick to the regular routines that were in place in classes already, whether that's about how we organise our trays, whether that's about the daily class quiz that we might do at the end of the day, trying to maintain as many of those routines as possible where it is possible to do so. A key thing has been about when we're designing learning tasks and we're designing learning engagements both in school and in the digital space, actually planning for collaboration during that time. So whether that's been, we've adopted various project-based learning models, but we've also looked at different ways where things like countdown games at various points in the day, where actually we can stop what we might be doing and to just have some time where we're collaborating on what might seem as a relatively simple task, but something that's actually highly engaging and motivating and an opportunity to collaborate from a distance with each other in the classroom. A key thing as well has been about how we present to an audience, and I'll touch on that a little bit later too. We've just completed our Year 6 exhibition, which is basically a research project that Year 6s or Primary 7s engage in their final year of primary school, that reflects all the skills, the personal attributes and the knowledge that they've gained throughout their time in school. They develop a line of inquiry, their research question, and then try and take action related to that or present to the community on that. That's been my past 3 weeks, especially working on that yesterday and today. They've just shared those presentations with the whole community, with parents, with families, with other schools within our network of schools here in Hong Kong, with local universities, with family members overseas. And you'll see Jalen in the top corner there, who did an excellent job of doing that today, basically leading the class through that and interacting with those around the world, sharing his research and his project, which has been amazing. And so it's about looking for the scope and the opportunities to be creative as well, but what's actually going to be manageable within the time frames and the scope of what we're doing too. And ultimately, it's about how we can use our digital tools as creatively as possible, which we can see happening in lots of places around the world. Now, to maintain both the quality learning experiences that are relevant, that support the well-being of our students, but also support the well-being of our staff, that's required daily check-ins. So with my team, I know teams around the school, they're checking in informally with each other at the very start of the day, midway through the day, and at the end of the day, just to, number one, check in how we're actually doing. What's causing us stress, what's been a bit overwhelming, how have people managed X, Y, or Z, and any suggestions of how we can tackle that in our own learning spaces in particular too. But ultimately, the collaboration has been about sharing the load as well. As people get to grips with these new digital platforms, that's not just something that we'll do during lockdown, that's something that's going to happen throughout the return to school as well. So actually ensuring that the load is shared where possible, there's room for collaboration, is important as we get to grips with that as well. And ultimately, it's about trusting each other, enabling each other to exercise agency, use the resources that we have, make decisions about what we think is important for the learners in our care, and actually have an opportunity to share that and moderate that with each other. And ultimately as well, it's been about the communication that's shared between us, within teams, across the school, the clarity of that and the regularity of that as well, to ensure that we're on the same page and we're supported where we need to as well. And it comes back to the shared purpose and the shared focus. It's about the well-being of our students in our community, and that's the crux of it. And everything we do is centred on that. So the conversations we have, the planning we do, always returns to how is this supporting the well-being of our students in our community. And ultimately as well, it's about how we identify and utilise the expertise and the successes across the school. And an example that I've put in the picture here is how we've actually utilised different skills, different expertise and technology with our colleagues across the road at our secondary school, and how that's also supported the transition process as well, which has been hugely important. The feeling of togetherness has been huge, or has been a huge focus for us. This has spanned from, I put an example on here of some of our daily check-ins we might do in class, whether that's how we actually say hi and check in with each other from a physical distance in the classroom, whether it's how we share individual things with teachers, between students and teachers about how they're feeling, things they want them to know, opportunities to, whether it's using sketch notes or other tools, to articulate what's on the top of students' thinking and how we might want to consider that in the learning process. Another thing has been about still connecting with our buddies in the school. Each year group is buddied with a younger year group. We've been able to maintain that just using a tool like Flipgrid, and actually taking the opportunity to write shared stories, but read them to each other, continue the stories between the year 3s, the primary 3s and the primary 6s. That's been a really important opportunity to maintain that social connection from a distance too. And I've put an example here as well of how actually our morning check-ins, periodically throughout the day, we're doing lessons simultaneously with our students at home, which has been facilitated through how we're using the platforms that we have access to. And ultimately, the engagement has been key. I'll elaborate on the Year 6 exhibition or the Primary 7 exhibition later if anybody wants me to talk a little bit more about that. But what we've tried to reflect in all the planned learning experiences is how we maintain physically distant social connections and what that might look like. So it's a chance to use the usual classroom games, embedding circle time and wellbeing or positive education learning engagements every single day, part of the daily routine, not your Thursday when you've got access to the shared space or a shared area. Continuing the family check-in, so the communication is regular, it's open, and it's reflective of what stage we're at now in terms of this hugely challenging circumstance. And also trying to build in transition activity throughout this whole time has been central, both across year groups as we meet new teachers and think about moving into a new year group next year, but also as our students come into our school from our local nurseries, but also as our students move to secondary school as well. So actually planning for creative approaches to that. Now, I've tried to synthesize a brief answer and I realise I'm pretty much at 20 minutes, so I'm going to stop. This is a brief synthesis, which I'm happy to come back to later, of some of the questions around how we continue assessment and monitoring and tracking progress throughout this time. The first thing that I would say about that is you have to first of all think about, right, what is it we actually value here? If it is students returning, maintaining social connections and well-being, that's the priority. Everything else, we determine what's feasible. We're continuing the learning, we're continuing learning and teaching, so we can identify what are the key benchmarks going to be then. Based on that, what are the revised benchmarks we're going to use for assessment at different points. But ultimately, throughout all of these tasks, when we're trying to think about assessment, recording and reporting, it's about making sure that our approaches to all of that is intentional, it's systematic, it's authentic in terms of how authentic is it of the learning process, how does it take account of the extreme situation we're in, is it relevant to actually be collecting this assessment or reporting this assessment information, and is it actually meaningful to support learning and progress as we move forward and as we move into August as well. So ultimately it's about we were asking ourselves the questions, what do we need to know? When do we need to know it? Why do we actually need to know this now? And what will influence this data given the current situation? And ultimately what it's meant is that we're not collecting huge amounts of assessment data. We're using our teacher judgments to actually understand how our students are coping, how they're getting on, how they've engaged with learning, and what that might mean for the next year, and using that information to collaborate in teams during that transition process so that the learning experience continues and it's reflective of what our students have been able to achieve now and what their needs are and what they're going to be as we continue school in August. So ultimately, it's about thinking about the intentionality behind assessment, recording and reporting, connecting it with the established tools we have already, and then thinking about, right, well, is this important now or what might we think about later? And I've put in a reference here that might be useful, and that's from a really interesting report called Thinking About Pedagogy in an Unfolding Pandemic, and the link is at the end. So ultimately, if Margaret allows me just one last minute just to share some broader points here, is that this has been very important in thinking about the specifics of learning and teaching in learning spaces across the school. But there is a bigger point here, and there's broader concerns about learning and teaching and education that as educators, I believe that we have a moral responsibility to be considering. In the past, and even currently, we've been relied on as educators to focus on concerns of curriculum, pedagogy, learner support, implementing education policy reform. But ultimately, our socio-political contexts have been changing drastically, not just in recent months, but in recent years. That's looked different in Hong Kong as it has in the UK and other places. And because of that, there's new demands that are placed upon us in terms of the leading role we take in communities, how we support our learners and families. And we have to think about that. So it's about trying to understand what is the professional capital that is going to be needed to continue responding, but also evolving how we work and how we operate to respond to the very dynamic context that we all now work in globally. How does that connect with how we constitute our professional role, our own identity? How does it connect with the culture of the places we're working in, the evolving needs of our community and their expectations, but also where the power lies to be able to make these decisions and respond in a quick way? So ultimately, I'm arguing that in a broader sense, We will need to move beyond what our traditional focus might have been through schools and education, whether that has been perhaps a rather narrow measure of attainment and progress or workforce preparation. What we've seen now is the central and a hugely important role of teachers, educators, school leaders to actually be focusing on the needs of our community, ensuring equity, concerns of justice, of equity, of well-being, of identity, and maintaining a community in a hugely stressful and changing global emergency. And ultimately, we need to think about, well, what does this mean for the future? The future might not necessarily get easier, but ultimately, what I believe is that schools and educators are going to play a much bigger and a much more important role in supporting communities as the world continues to change. Learning and teaching will be at the heart of that, but the broader community experience will be central to that too. Thank you so much for the opportunity to actually share some of these reflections. I've left some links at the end if there's anything you might want to engage with a little bit further, and they'll be shared at the end of the webinar too. Thank you.
Well, again, Paul, thank you very much. Another really fascinating and informative presentation. You picked up, I think, on some of the questions that are coming through, but I'm trying to collate some of these and we'll hopefully get to them. We have to stop. Just a reminder that this is being live streamed and recorded, and so you will be able to go back and listen to this again. And Carolina and I will be talking about what we're going to do with the very, very good questions that you're all posing, both pre the session, but also just now on the chat as well. And I've just actually responded to one that Laura asked about children seeming to go back to the same teachers, whereas our pupils here in Scotland are going to come in and meet a new teacher. And I was just commenting, we're discussing that very thing here at the University of Glasgow, and I assume many or all universities and colleges too, where how do you build that community when you don't know the people, you haven't built up the trust, you haven't built up the relationship. So I think there are questions being asked here about education and learning generally and not just in school context. So Paul, thank you again. And as always, pictures, my favourite is that child near the beginning with a huge beaming smile. I think that's what we really are hoping that all our learners will get back to being able to do at some point, is to have that excited smile as they're coming to learn. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Athol McLaughlin, who is in Western Academy of Beijing. I had the pleasure of visiting Athol's school just recently, and I had a wonderful morning that I spent with Athol and his colleagues and the young people, finding out about the learning that was going on there. So Athol, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to you now. We're going to a different part of the world, just further up the map. So over to you in Beijing, Athol. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your warm introduction, Margaret, and thank you everyone for having me here as well. All of the things I'm going to share bear remarkable, and maybe not so remarkable, resemblance to the things we've heard from Brianna and from Paul about collaboration and about health and well-being and all these sorts of things. My themes, I kind of got three broad themes that I'll dip in and out of throughout my presentation. Thinking about plan for uncertainty, about being collaborative and creative, and about being kind. And these things can help us in our journey if we're going back to school. My school, Western Academy in Beijing, is a large and well-established international school in Beijing. I currently teach grade 2, which is the equivalent of primary 3 in Scotland. And since my school closed on the 24th of January, I have been teaching online now for a total of 18 weeks, which is crazy. And during that time, I actually came home to Scotland for 8 weeks with my 2 children, leaving my wife in Beijing because of her job. And then it all went topsy-turvy again. We returned to China and spent 2 weeks in a lovely quarantine hotel in Xi'an. I won't be back. Before arriving back in Beijing to our home. And so to coin a phrase, it's been a roller coaster, completely ruled by one thing, uncertainty. And so whatever you plan to do, and however you plan to do it, manage expectations and be cautious with overconfidence and optimism, in the knowledge that uncertainty at the moment reigns supreme in my opinion. The story I will share is also a collaborative journey. These are my personal reflections, but the operation to go back to school required a massive collective skill set across the school, and most of the stuff I'm doing and showing isn't necessarily me. It's other people who, I can't name them all, but it was a huge collaborative effort across the school. And it was often a stressful operation too. We were following strict guidelines set by the local Beijing Education Authority, and just 3 grades were allowed to open. So it was kindergarten, grade 4 and grade 5 were all due to reopen on June 8th for 1 week, because it was actually our last week of school. But the plan was then to extend the school into a summer camp period, and those students and families would have the option to sign up for the summer camp if they wished. We were also managing the expectations of parents who were anxious and ready for their children to go back to school. Very different to the situation in Scotland. And up until a few days ago, Beijing was completely virus-free for nearly 50 days. A handful of grades in the middle school and the high school in my school had already returned a few weeks earlier, so we had the added benefit and knowledge and experience of their going back to school to learn from. A final inspection by the Beijing inspectors 2 days before the opening gave the all clear to grade 4 and grade 5, but not to KG. They have a particular thing in kindergarten in Beijing anyway, where they have a nurse or a medical person in the KG. We have a nurse in the building, but not in that building. So therefore it did not meet the standard. And it was quite common amongst the international schools that this happened. So plan for uncertainty and be collaborative. In my experience, creativity and kindness are arguably 2 of the key foundation stones of every good teacher. They're vital, not just in making the week successful, but they were vital in actually making it enjoyable too. So here we go. Fear and anxiety. This is me and my boy, Jamie. He's 10 years old. He also goes to the school and he's in grade 4. So he was in one of the cohorts that was allowed to go back. When it was announced his grade could return, we were instinctively all very apprehensive. And this is a feeling you're going to feel as a parent, as a teacher, and as a student. And I didn't have a choice to go back to school, but he did. And he didn't want to go. All his closest friends were not there. Many families in our school are still locked out of China. Social distancing, mask wearing, and being locked to a table were not the way we were used to learning at home for the last 5 months. Home felt like a safer and more flexible space to learn than school. And many of the areas of the school were restricted. I agreed with his choice. And eventually, we talked it more. And you kind of live with it and you think about it. And eventually we went, maybe we should give it a go. What do you think? And he went, okay, I'll give it a go. He wasn't looking totally confident. And if he didn't like it, then fine, he wouldn't go back the next day. So this is us riding on our scooter into school on that Monday morning. If you can't see that, it says the new normal at the top there. So what I want to share is a little bit of some of the safety protocols and the kind of nuts and bolts that we had to put in place and how it looked as a student and a teacher in that situation. This is Jamie going into school. They've got clear guidelines. You can see this is 1 meter social distancing in China, not 2. So you can see there's different lanes for different students. They go into a tent. They get their temperature taken. They have to wear a mask all the time when they're inside. They're allowed to take that off when they're having a lunch or when they go outside for break. Even when they were doing gym, they had to wear their mask all the time too. There were clear guidelines about taking your temperature. Students and staff had to do it twice a day. We used an app as staff to do that, and the students, we wrote it down on a piece of paper and then handed it to someone who documented it. There also were clearly divided and marked pathways for direction of travel around the school, and clear steps about what to do and procedures if we suspected someone had symptoms as both an adult and a child. Now, likewise, there's lots of detail in this, and I know the organisers and Margaret will hopefully share this with you later so you can have a closer scrutiny of it. Another key thing was just reinforcing and reminding students and staff about these new norms through graphics. And the school's got a brilliant communications department who put together these, and hopefully local councils might, or even local NHS trust funds will get involved with doing these sort of things too. Really clear, really child friendly. They were everywhere. You could not think about it because they were just all over the school. So wearing a mask, what 1 metre distancing looks like, looking out for symptoms, reminders once again about washing our hands, and kind of more detailed ones here that came from one of the local hospitals. But one of the key things that we learned from teachers who'd already been here in the middle and the high school was don't be afraid to be yourself. In other words, don't be afraid to have fun. And yet, it's easier said than done. Teachers and students were all very serious and quiet and focused on day one. And the first day back was extremely stressful. And Rihanna has already mentioned that as well. You were nervous. And she said, like a probation teacher. Yeah, I mean, I felt like a student, less a probation teacher. And don't get me wrong, we were working in a completely alien way to how any of us imagine or have experienced school. And actually, once the first day was over, it really wasn't that bad. You got used to it. And then you thought creatively, what else can we do? How can we be flexible within this framework? Something completely different to Scottish schools is that we only had 30% of our teaching staff actually in Beijing. Everyone else is still marooned outside China, and there's no management at all. Therefore, our principal and vice principal both zoomed in live to greet students and teachers on the first day, which was actually really cool. There were on these massive big screens, and the teachers and the students were coming in. So there was a novelty and there was an interest about that, and they were saying hello. So that was great. Amongst the staff, but we did have all our local staff in Beijing, so all the classroom assistants and people like that. And amongst the staff that were there in Beijing, there was this incredible camaraderie and spirit to make the week work. And we almost felt like we were gladiators, and we had all the staff that weren't there cheering us on and sending messages. And so it was an incredible spirit, and I'm sure that's reflected as well in Rihanna and Paul's school as well, everything they've said. So the school were also very fortunate to be blessed with lots of resources. There were new hand washing stations put around everywhere outside and inside. As I said, the social distancing rule in China is 1 metre. And so we use small yellow dots on the tables, in the canteen, on chairs that are in the hallways and corridors, just to show people exactly where they could sit as a marker and a constant reference of where those okay spaces were. On day one, though, the most important thing to begin with was establishing the new routines and the new norms, calmly and kindly. Also asking students to be vigilant and helpful towards us as adults. We're doing it together. We're all there in the same space. It has to be a communal, collective, community endeavour. It really does. And blended learning was the model we used too. And we'd already been doing online learning through various forms, for the last 18 weeks. And not all the students were in Beijing. In the class I was in, which was grade 5, it was very unusual actually, because there were 17 out of all the 19 students were there. And I wasn't teaching my class. I was still teaching my grade 2 class concurrently during that week as well. So we started each day with a morning meeting, which is a bit similar to like a kind of circle time affair, and lots of fun games and a focus on social and emotional well-being. And then that first day, the students planned their own flexible timetable for the week based on their learning activities that had been set out by the teacher in grade 5. And all this was already well established during remote learning, so this was nothing new for them. The afternoon was, for grade 5 anyway, was PE and then a block of free choice. Now, you may have seen 1 or 2 pictures like this. This is actually a school up the road from our own school in Beijing. And you may have seen the ones with hats with a big long sort of helicopter blades coming out. Now, I think there's good things and there's maybe not bad things, but there's caution to be said about this as well. Whereas there's a practical element to this and a fun element to get a feeling of what social distancing is like, I think we have to be mindful of too many gimmicks. Because the message that we really want to share, it's not about wearing a hula hoop or wearing a silly hat. It's about creating a shared identity, and it's creating a collective commitment to the school, trust in one another, and ultimately a stronger and more caring community. If students don't understand why they're doing things, and adults are not doing it too, as you can see in this picture, then what's the point? You shouldn't bother doing that. Just to go further with that thought, I can't see all the screen. Okay, here is a quote from Alfie Cohn, who talks a lot about unconditional teaching, which is something that I was reflecting on continually during the week. And he says it's about the countless gestures that let them know, being the students and other staff, that we're glad to see them, that we trust and respect them, that we care what happens to them within whatever structures we work. I think that's key. We need to think about whether our posture towards students really provides them with as much of the unconditional acceptance they need as possible. And I could not stop thinking about that idea of unconditional acceptance and just I'm there for them. I need to make this work. I need to be this caring individual. That's why I became a teacher, but I need to do it with my team, and we're all there together. And actually they need to give that to me as well. It's a kind of feedback loop of what you do as a caring individual. Okay, so engagement was key, and Paul focused on this quite rightly. I mean, it was absolutely key. And PE activities were absolutely brilliant for this. We've got Geraldine Watkins there, the PE teacher. She planned an incredible set of activities, all carefully checked and designed around social distancing. So using badminton nets, using the ping pong tables, even playing dodgeball. It worked absolutely brilliantly. And they brought out so much joy and natural energy from the students. It really was inspirational for the rest of us being there to watch that and think, okay, there's more that we can do. And it wasn't very long into Tuesday, day 2, until we began to loosen up and have fun with the confines of the new normal. And this is the grade 5 class I was with, ceremoniously bowing to the real, although still virtual, teacher on the whiteboard as a good morning. So you're just having fun with it, you're messing about. And then by Thursday, oh my goodness, by Thursday we had a fun day. And our amazing teacher, a PE teacher, planned a fun day outside with, once again, all the activities designed and checked for social distancing, but with extra fun and a feel-good factor of 50. I mean, notice the fantastic smiles as the 2 girls there eat their socially distant lollies at the bottom. But as you can see, we had that space. So it's really these things that also determine what you've got in your school and what you can do, and thinking creatively about how you make the most of those spaces as well. We ended the week and the school year with our traditional assemblies. And now, usually, these are these massive events and they're a bit like a rock gig, and there's bands and there's kids performing, and the whole school is in one huge big gym hall, like all the middle school and the high school and the elementary school. And it's incredible. The first time I went to one of these, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I was used to like maybe 200 kids in an assembly in Scotland, and we had like thousands of children and everyone singing, and there's parents there. And so this year was very different, and it's a huge hallmark of the school, and it's a huge thing that they really take pride in. And so the plan originally was for us to have a screen, there was going to be a Zoom, and we were going to participate with the screen. And we're like, by Friday, we're like, we can't do that. That's not what this is about. So no longer, we were buzzing by that point. We were buzzing with ideas and wanting to do more with it. And so no longer being confined as a 3D teacher in a 2D space, creativity kicked in again, and we all clubbed together to make these assemblies as interactive, fun, and real as we could. And in the spur of the moment, my good friend here, Mr. Cowell, and I put together some lyrics to Yellow Submarine, which became COVID Submarine, and we had dancing going on. But if you can see, they're still socially distant. They're a metre apart in their chairs. And it was fantastic. I once again felt like a real teacher surrounded by real students in a real school again. And if all these teachers listen to this, you'll know how much you miss that, or how much you're just like, what am I doing? I mean, this is what it's about, and this is why we do it. So to get back into that and to make sure you're doing all these things carefully to these protocols and guidelines, you get a lot of satisfaction from that. It's incredible. So challenges and reflections. Let's be clear, the week was not without its challenges. I'm maybe painting a rosy picture, I'm trying to be positive, but it was challenging too. And I reflected constantly along the way. Lunchtimes were a particular challenge and hotspot. The schedule had the grade 4s and grade 5s at a staggered lunch break, but they found it really hard to sit still as they were asked to do for 30 minutes. So we brought in games and books and art materials into the canteen to help with that. Teaching with a face mask on all day is really not pleasant. I was often genuinely afraid of inhaling it as I was speaking, and everyone around you sounds muffled. So that's hard. I personally found that hard. Maybe you won't, hopefully you won't. Social distancing is a challenge, but you've got to be realistic. There were times when students and adults would walk or brush past each other. It happens, but be calm and kind and how you nudge that compliance, okay? The guidelines state that students could not talk face to face, so they couldn't be facing each other at a table. They had to sit side by side like that. But it's virtually impossible to impose them not to speak to each other. So you just, you naturally turn your head to say something to somebody, and that's okay, right? So you learn to find the flexibility within the framework that's okay. And what did I learn? First day was the hardest. It was stressful, it was alien, and completely bound by establishing the new routines and norms. But it gets better, trust me. And you've heard from Leanna and Paul, it does get better, and you actually enjoy it. And actually by Friday, you're loving it, seriously. Even though it's weird and different, you're just loving being back in that space and with those children and with your colleagues. Social and emotional connections are so important. Chatting and being around their peers is the most important thing, I think, to nurture and establish early on. The space and resources you have dictates your plans. I know in Scotland, the variety of school spaces and designs and layouts is huge. So make the best of what you have following the guidelines. There's not one size fits all. PE and fun activities are essential to plan for. I mean, that's the big takeaway for me was like, yeah, you've got to give that sense of fun. You've got to give that sense of we're back and we're a community and we've got a spirit of togetherness, as Paul said too. And look for flexibility and creativity and support teacher agency to come up with new ideas. Rihanna spoke to this. Support teachers to be autonomous, to check through things clearly, but to ask for those ideas. Expect good things happening because we're teachers, we do that. And couch the new normal with tenderness and a community spirit. Don't be harsh. Don't hand out sanctions and that kind of stuff. I personally think blended learning is essential, but structures and approaches must be clear and allow for student choice and flexibility too. It's not the normal environment. You're at school, but you still need to have that flexibility and choice. And just be you. This is what we do. This is the career path we have chosen. We are kind and compassionate human beings first. We also happen to be teachers. Human beings first. Okay, this is a slide and a couple of things in here. And one is really a kind of the feedback loop for me. And it was an email from a parent who I've never met and a student I didn't know actually in grade 5 at all. And I'll read it and it says, I would like to, so it says, Dear Mr. McLaughlin, am I spelling your name correctly? Yes, you are. Not many do, but she is brilliantly, really chuffed for that. I would like to thank you for taking on your new role during this last week. Such and such hadn't been a happy online student. And while he usually doesn't report any happenings at school, to me, he expressed much contentment about being in your class. Yes, he's very nice, which I like that. I hope you can spend a lovely summer and hope to be able to meet you in person sometime. And on the right is actually, and I get emotional, a bit like Rihanna looking at this, it's actually the first time I met any of my own students in grade 2 for 5 months, for those 18 odd weeks of separation. And he's a kid called Jonas, and he was arranged to collect his art materials and his stuff from the classroom. And it was really emotional. And the key thing about this is about reconnection. Yeah, it's about connection, but it's about reconnecting with the school, reconnecting with the community, reconnecting with each other. And his mum was desperate for him to see me. And it was an emotional moment. And there were a few tears from us all, as you might expect. Next up, I would like to share a student reflection of the week. And it's actually my son, Jamie, who you met earlier on in a biker's helmet. He's taken the helmet off for this, fortunately. And just his own reflections of what he liked, he didn't like, challenges, things he would change. So his own voice about what he would change. And yeah, how he felt at the end. So I'll play this for you.
I liked how the 1 meter rule wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was. I thought it was going to be like we'd have to stay away. I had these crazy visions of a person on the other side of the classroom and another person at the whiteboard. But when I got there, it wasn't that bad. Another thing I really enjoyed was PE, because we did lots of fun activities, and there was an activity outside called Fun Day, which we could take our masks off when we went outside because it was also physical. The 1 meter rule prevented you from like going like, hey dude, what's up? Like, and tapping them on the shoulder. So yeah, we had to stay away a bit. But when we got back to school, I didn't realize we were still going to do online learning. Like, we just got our school iPads and just set it up, online learning. And we had activities in the afternoon, but I was really surprised by that. I thought we were going to, not be taught online. We were going to, be teached, the teacher saying, Albert Einstein is a very important person, blah, blah, blah. You could see lots of other people that you knew from different classes. And also it was kind of just like a normal one, except there wasn't the regular teachers that did it. You may think it was really bad, but it actually wasn't, because you could still take it off when you had to eat, obviously, and drink, because you can't do that without taking your mask off. The only times you really remembered it is when they mentioned the masks in PE, or sometimes you'd forget to put your mask on and they say put your mask on. So yeah, it wasn't that bad. I would actually change the makerspace, a place where people can go and build stuff, and put it back on, because I think it's really good for me and other people to learn more about the world in there and create stuff. And it can be quite calming when you create things. You just get really into it and you completely forget about everything else. If I didn't go back to school, I wouldn't have known what it was like. I wouldn't have known what happened there. And when I went back, as I said, it wasn't really that bad. So yeah, that's why. I would choose going back to school because I enjoyed seeing my friends in reality and not online. Yeah.
So there you go. Thank you, Jamie. And there is an epilogue to our tale. Remember I said at the beginning to plan for uncertainty. Well, with the recent spike of cases in Beijing, all schools have now closed indefinitely. And it's frustrating because learning from that short week back, we had then planned and collaborated on and really engaging and hands-on 2 weeks of activities planned for those kids for the summer school. But it wasn't to be. And things, as we all know, can change in a heartbeat. And the new norm is here to stay for a lot longer than we care to imagine. So just as a final mention, I think the most important thing for me as a human being and as a teacher, and Paul's talked really eloquently about what new position we might have in the world. Well, for us in the world, the most important thing that we can do is simply to be kind to each other and to other people. And I'm going to quote someone else with great kindness, Jacinda Ardern, and she said back in March 23rd, "I have one final message, be kind. We will only get through this together, but only if we stick together. Be strong and be kind." And thank you for listening. That's me done.
Athol, thank you so much for that very personal, honest, realistic, reflective account of your experiences. And I can see in the chat there many people appreciating what not only you, but Paul and Rihanna too, all giving that personal account of what you have been through. Please thank your son. That was wonderful. It is so important, I think, to hear voices. We, the children's rights group, just this week, or the end of last week maybe, launched work that they've been doing, asking young people about their thoughts, and so important, I think, too, that we remember to speak to them. There are many questions in the chat. There's questions too, I think, about What do we do for those children who are on the edge, the children who were struggling before all of this? Particular questions from people in particular contexts. I've been talking with Carolina, and it is our intention to pick up on these questions both on the chat here that we have and the questions that were posted. And we will do something with those in a written forum, or even perhaps a short video format. I haven't actually asked our 3 presenters if they're willing to participate in this, but hopefully they will be. And so can I ask you to watch this space? We will be putting some more information out later. We're also planning on actually having some more webinars as well that will deal with some of the other issues around learning. I think health and well-being and learning for me come together. Good learning will be good health and well-being, and vice versa. So I have one question where time is up, but I have asked each of the 3 presenters. Somebody said, one of the questions that was in the chat was, with many of us in positions of not knowing what to expect from the beginning of the new school year, what advice would you give in planning ahead? And I've asked each of our presenters if they would maybe just share one thing. So Rihanna, can I start with you? What would be the one thing you would say to everyone who has listened in this morning?
I think Athol said it really well. It's actually to be kind to yourself, ground yourself and think about your own health and well-being, because if you're not fit, you're not going to be able to do anything anyway. So I think the reality is take good care of you and take good care of your family and those around about you, and then you'll be fit for what you need to do next. So take the time.
Thank you very much. And Paul?
I actually had some time to make notes. I did have a full page that I wanted to say, but I'll choose one instead. I think the key thing would be systematic in your planning for the resumption. So plan based on what the core functions of the school are and how we want to resume them, well-being and learning and teaching. And just 1.2 would be make sure you've got regular checkpoints to reflect on what that looks like and what might need to change throughout that whole process too.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. And Athol, with the least time to think about this, can I ask you what your one thing would be?
I think just on the back of that, I'd maybe choose something specific and just really focus on how you support and nurture those most vulnerable children in your community, and how you really help them to support them through the week, and thinking about what they need in terms of your staffing and your individuals to make it successful for them. Because that, I didn't really speak to that, but we did a lot of that. So that's a really, really important part of making the inclusive part of the schoolwork.
Yeah, and we've heard that word inclusive used quite a few times. And of course, from my background, I lecture in inclusive education, so I'm very interested in how we seek to do that. Can I thank our 3 presenters for 3 very different but very much interrelated presentations that will help us all to think through this current situation that we find ourselves in. Can I thank you all for signing up? We really had no idea if this would be of interest, how many people might come, and we were very cautious in the number of places that we opened up at first, and very quickly realised it was going to be of great interest to very many people. And so thank you very much. And as I say, it is our plan to host more webinars. And this is also our first joint venture between myself in the School of Education and Carolina in the Tile network here at the university. And I think it's going to be the first of many, so keep your eye open for many more events, not all related to COVID, but certainly related to what lies at the heart of what we do, whether it be in nursery, kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, higher education, that idea of learning and teaching. Can I also thank Carolina particularly for doing all the technology bit. She has been absolutely amazing, so thank you very, very much, Carolina. Collaboration, I think, is also key, and we've certainly done that this morning, so thank you. So thank you all very much. We will be in touch, and I wish you all the very best, and be safe, be kind, and stay in touch. So thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.